Welcome to Top of Mind, the show where we talk to real estate industry insiders and experts about the biggest trends impacting the market today. Enjoy the show.
Mike Simonsen here. Thanks for joining me today. Welcome to the Top of Mind podcast. This is where I talk to the smartest leaders, thinkers, doers in the real estate industry. We like to go beyond the data, and dive into the context and the views and the opinions. You know, at Altos Research, we track every home for sale in the country. We track all the supply and the demand and all the pricing and the changes in that data. And most of our work is analyzing the data and presenting it out. The Top of Mind podcast is where we get perspective and context. And so what we're going to do today is talk with Ali Wolf from Zonda. Ali is the chief economist for Zonda, the largest home building proptech company in North America. As head of the economics department, Ali manages and analyzes all the content for Zonda, runs special research projects, strategizes with the nation's largest home builders, and presents nationwide, covering topics across the housing market and the wider economy. Ali is also the creator of Zonda's proprietary indexes, including the New Home Pending Sales Index and the New Home Lot Supply Index. And these are important because Ali's skills and the work at Zonda is actually very complementary to the work we do at Altos Research, where we're looking at the existing stock and the homes listed for sale. Ali's looking at the new construction and the trends in adding to that stock. So we're going to geek out on some data today. And we're going to dive in and see if we can get some perspective on the market right now in the coming years. So welcome, Ali Wolf.
Thank you so much, Mike. And it's fun because I feel like I know you from Twitter. We're Twitter friends.
We're Twitter friends.
So it's nice to actually connect on this podcast as well. Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate it. So let's start off. Tell us about Zonda.
Yeah, so Zonda, it's really actually a fun backstory where Zonda right now, like you mentioned in the introduction, we're the largest home building prop tech company across the country. And we came about because there were two competing companies. And it's interesting that we would even call each other competitors because we had completely different data sets. So there was this company that was called Metro Study, and there was this company called Myers Research. And Metro Study had all of this lot data across the country. They had people literally driving cars, going to different developments and saying, there's a bulldozer there, there's a stake in the ground, and they would classify it as such. What Myers Research had, and that's the part of the merger that I came from, Myers Research was, I always say it was the demand side. I don't think the rest of the company would actually say that, but what we would track is the actively selling communities. And we could tell you, where are the best actively selling communities? Who are the builders? What are the best price points? And those two companies came together. We now track the entire building life cycle. So as you mentioned, Mike, we track the entire new home side from raw land all the way up to the closing out of a new home community.
And this is a big day. So it's middle of December. We just had the new home construction numbers. So we're going to talk about those today because that's like the headline, interesting stuff going on there. Lots of implications too. So I can't wait to get your take on that. How did you get into housing data?
Oh gosh, I will try to keep that short. I think I always knew I liked economics and always knew as of, the first class I took, it was like, this is my field. I love it. And I had planned on going into law school, I think just because what I had heard is that if you get a degree in economics, you need to apply it to something. And at that point, I didn't really know what that application was. So just law school made sense. And I think by some kind of divine intervention or something, someone talked me out of that. I ended up not going that route. And thank goodness, because that's not right. That's not my personality. I wouldn't have liked it. And it was my senior year of undergrad. I happened to take a housing economics class. And of course, I had seen my parents buy and sell homes, all of that stuff, but I never studied interest rates and affordability and inventory and policy. And that really, I had already gotten into a grad program for a completely different degree. It was international political economy, moved out to London, out in the UK, and switched my degree the first week. I was like, I need to be in housing economics. I need to be focused on that. And so it was a bunch of weird twists and turns, the best laid plans, twists and turns. And here I am.
Amazing. So you actually, in undergrad, you recognized housing economics as the narrow niche that you were interested in.
It's an embarrassing story in that I used to go to Barnes and Noble and go to their economics section, and I would just pick out books, like just what book should I read? And I was going on vacation and I happened to pick up a book called The Housing Boom. And I brought that on vacation with me. And my day you get the syllabus your senior year at that housing economics class, the textbook for that class was The Housing Boom and Bust. And I was like, oh, like I've already read that book. I read that on vacation. And so I think the professor from that day on liked me. And I'm sure that didn't hurt, that you just felt like, invested in the class because of that too.
That's amazing. That's really fascinating. My journey is actually a real personal one. Like I bought my tiny little overpriced piece of shit Silicon Valley house in 2001. That was two bubbles ago, I like to say. And so like I was analyzing for my own self. And it's actually kind of one of the reasons that I'm so excited to have you on the call today is because, I'm a middle of San Francisco. So it is Bay Area housing market. These are 50 or 70-year-old homes, and there's nothing on the market. Like it's a real peculiar market in the world. New construction to me personally is super foreign. It's like, it's the middle of Texas. I'm like, I have no idea about what that world is like. And so, when we built the Altos products, like we're focusing on resale and that existing home market. And it never occurred to me at the time to even think about new construction and what that has. So let's dive in and get some geeky on some data here. And I'm also, by the way, interested in the Zonda approach to data. You guys do a lot of surveys. Like you call a bunch of people to get your data. Is that correct? Like to get some analysis. Is that right?
Yeah. So we do so many different ways to collect data. So one is, yes, we have a dedicated research team that's picking up the phone and calling new home communities. They have, let's just say one researcher has 300 communities that they're in charge of every month they have to call. And so they have the relationships with the salespeople. They check in with them every month. Like I said, we still actually have people that are driving the different sites, and we have satellite imagery. So we're able to track based on, we've taught the satellites, or I guess the back end of that, we've taught them to say, hey, that's a platted lot. That's going through a different stage of development. So we've taught them to actually be more efficient than what a human would be. And then we supplement all of that with a monthly division president survey. So there's a lot of different ways that we're collecting data.
Yeah, the division presidents are the people who are over like a whole metro area.
That's exactly it.
Constructing new metro areas. And then who are your customers?
So our clients will be builders, developers, private equity, hedge funds. Those would be the paid ones. And then, of course, we are constantly talking to policymakers, to press, to just talk about the state of the market as well.
Yeah. That's terrific. Okay. That's an excellent background there. So we call the podcast Top of Mind. It's now December 2021. It's been 2 nuts years in the housing market. What's top of mind for you right now?
So 2 things, and then you can decide which of those 2 you want to go with. The first is lots. And I know you mentioned the lot supply index. I know I've mentioned a few times how we track lot data, but the reason that's so important is you've already mentioned that the data came out this morning for starts and permits. I don't know how anyone can forecast the housing market without knowing what's happening with lots. Not your side of the market, the new home side of the market. Yeah. You have to know, are there lots for builders to build on? So that would be one of the critical things that we're paying attention to. And then the second would be every year for the past, I can't remember if it's 5 or 6 years, we've been doing a millennial survey. And I just launched my millennial survey, I think it was a week or 2 ago. And we have really cool insights that are coming out of that. I have 500 respondents. So obviously we're not there yet of having our sample size that we want, but there's still some kind of early signs in there that I think are fascinating.
Okay, so we get all kinds to go with. So let's start with the lots.
Yes.
So lots coming out of the bubble burst. Home builders shed a bunch of lots to keep their cash. What's happened in the last decade, and what's the index telling us right now?
Oh my gosh. So I guess going back, and we'll do the history really fast, is that last cycle, it just felt like the demand was going to go on forever, and you could just keep moving further away, and you could keep absorbing those lots and developing those lots, and there will be people to buy those homes. As you mentioned, there was a point that didn't happen. And so some of those lots became what we call zombie lots, where you had lots out there, and a builder would have them and they wanted to get them off their books, or they had to sit with them, whatever it was. There was this buildup of inventory that over the past 10 years, probably 15 years at this point, builders have been kind of working through that inventory, maybe going back to the city and saying, we originally planned this. Remember, McMansions were popular way back when. They're not as popular today, even though I think a lot of people still think that's all builders are building, which is not the case. So they would go back to the city and say, hey, can we do this different? Can we do a more dense community? Can we try to adjust the product type? And so that's one of the big things that changed. And over the years, again, builders were absorbing it. Where we are now, starting in probably June of last year, so that would be June of 2020, there was this mad dash to absorb lots and to get lots and to get ready. And this was after every builder pausing in March and April and saying, wait, never mind, this is another housing bust. We don't want to be involved. And then realizing the market's going crazy. So our lot supply index right now shows that vacant developed lots. And so that means a lot that builder could go buy tomorrow and start going vertical on a home. Vacant developed lots is at an all-time low. So it means that available lots are very constrained, but builders have been buying lots. The reason it's at an all-time low is because they've been purchased. So that's how you can support some of the building that we're seeing, is because anything that was available in any kind of decent location, builders are trying to now bring to the market.
Wow. Okay. So, and as we know, with the permits numbers announced today, we have the most new construction homes ever that have been, or ever in whatever, 40 years or something like that, that have been under construction, or maybe 50 years, like that are in that construction process. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And that's really these, like all the lots have been bought up and they're somewhere in that process. We've had all the supply delays. So they're starting more and they're not finishing. Right?
Yes.
What's the implications? What are we looking at there? Does that mean, because like I hear a lot of housing market bears who look at that and say there are record high numbers of homes in the middle of construction. Therefore, there's a giant wave of new supply going to happen. How should we look at that?
So in a lot of cases, so there's two different ways to look at it. And I don't agree with that bear analysis, just to set the tone. The first way is that in a lot of cases, those homes that are being built already have a buyer attached to them. And what's happening is they're not getting the windows, they're not getting the refrigerators, they're not getting the garage doors. And so what should have taken X amount of months is now taking Y amount of months, and that's stretching it out, which means more homes are getting stuck in that under construction phase longer than they normally would. The second way to look at that is that builders have realized we could sell more homes if we had more homes to sell. And so they're trying to do more spec homes, which, going back to the past, spec homes got builders in a lot of trouble during the mid-2000s housing boom. So they stopped. Now you want to do spec homes if you're a builder, because you can guarantee that that home's going to be built. You can decide, okay, they're going to be more efficient building processes, because then you're going to say, we're going to have all of these windows of this size, and we need you to guarantee that we're going to get those windows, instead of Mike picking one window size, Allie picking another window size, all these different customizations that will hold back the production of homes. So I would say that's not a sign of overbuilding. It's a sign of a strategy shift, and it's a sign of the times, because of the supply chain problem.
Interesting. Okay. So it was like homes went from 4 months and now all of a sudden they're looking at 14 months or something to complete. And so they're building up there. Okay. And so the strategy shift is something I hadn't considered. And that's like builder strategy, less custom, more standard.
Yes.
And interesting. And so in some senses, like that's maybe means that the builders, while they're sitting on all this stuff, trying to get it done, they're actually in a stronger position than they're gambling less. There are less spec homes happening. Is that what's going on? Like, is that an indication of like financial strength?
I would say it gives builders a little bit more certainty. So let me step back. One thing that changed, and not every builder did this, but there was this thing that was introduced in, I think at the beginning of this year, so 2021, that was called a kickout clause, which was builders would say to a buyer, I am willing to sell you this plot of dirt and I will build you a custom home. But if my costs go up, we're going to share how much my costs have gone up. And that actually became a bit of a PR nightmare because buyers didn't like that. You know, they thought they bought the home for 400 and now they have to spend 20,000 more. So what we found is that builders had said, you know what, instead of putting the customer on the line and instead of kind of hurting that relationship, if we start spec homes, we can wait to sell at a certain stage of construction. We now know, let's say framing is a huge part of the cost of a home. If they wait till framing, they know how much their lumber pack cost. And so now there's not as much uncertainty around the cost. They have more certainty around the price and they can keep the customer happy on the other end.
That's interesting. Do you, are the home builders, do they hedge that stuff? Like, are they doing any financial hedging, like, you know, on lumber and stuff like that to try to lock that in? I can't imagine. I know the small guys aren't. They kind of wing it, but how does that work for those guys?
And I think historically the answer has always been yes. And I think there's just been a little bit more pushback on the supplier side. And I haven't had a conversation recently, but I remember there was a point that you weren't really given much of an option to hedge. I don't know the inner workings of that from a supplier point of view, but I know that has evolved as the market has changed it as well.
Interesting. And that actually brings us, so as they build these more standard homes and they change the sales side and the target of the market, that actually brings us to the other thing that you said top of mind was the millennials, right? So, so tell us what we're learning about the millennials.
Yeah, and I want to start with something that I probably shouldn't even say, but I'm going to say it anyways, which is I find that people, this is going to come off so wrong, but I'm going to say it. I have found people say, and no offense if you're one of these people, but I have had people say, you know, look at the number of home sales. Because we have good home sales, there is not any kind of affordability challenge in today's market. And if you ask me, that's just about the most elitist thing that can come out of someone's mouth, because that's coming from someone who has a good income, who maybe had already owned a home, they have some equity, they can take advantage of low interest rates, they didn't lose their job during the pandemic. Like, I think that is a narrow scope of maybe higher educated, higher income individuals that are saying that. And they're saying, well, I can still buy a home. What are you talking about? And our data from the millennials, and by the way, so we classify millennials, I know it depends on the source, between 1980 and 2000. And I don't ever, since the launch of my millennial survey, I don't want only millennials that make over 100,000 or only millennials that make over 60,000. I want someone who is sitting on Facebook, they see my Facebook ad, and they click on it. I want them to be a renter. I want them to be a stay-at-home parent. I really don't care who you are, what you do. I just want to hear what you say. And of those that are renting, the number one reason that they're still renting is not because they want to rent forever. In fact, we only have 7% of millennials that never want to own a home. It all comes down to affordability and their ability to pay. And that's either I can't afford where I want to live, or I have student loans, or I don't have a down payment. So we do know that there are millennials buying homes. Of course there are. But there are plenty that are seeing the market and saying, wow, my income, maybe it's grown, but it hasn't kept up with how much prices have gone up.
Yeah, for sure. And as rates fall and the payment is more affordable, like that's what was one of the dynamics of the last, it's actually probably no longer true, but like, as you know, even as home prices were climbing, rates were falling, and, you know, payments were getting more affordable, but we still had the down payment problem.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely it. And And it goes back to, it depends on who you are, because what our survey showed is that 60% of millennials saved more money in 2021 than 2020. So again, if you were in a good place, you probably do have a little bit more money towards a down payment. Plus, as you know, the FHA loan limits have gone up. And so now there's a little bit of assistance where you can do a low down payment loan. And by the way, if you're going to go talk to a new home builder, they're not going to discriminate against you being an FHA buyer like someone who's in the existing home market, who would say they're not discriminating, but we all kind of understand that they're going to take a 20% down payment or an all cash offer.
Interesting. Do you notice in the millennial data, is there a demographic appeal to new construction versus existing? Is it changing, or is it the same percentage wise?
Such a good question, because that's one of the results I was looking at today. It seems that the preference is new, but the purchase becomes existing. And I think some of that does come down to the affordability aspect. But that's changed a little bit because the spread between new and existing homes has come down a little bit. And that'll depend on the product. And, there's a lot of other factors that go into that. But a lot of times, I think in particular, the millennials that are cost constrained, not the ones that sky's the limit, the existing home market is a very good entry level starting point.
Yeah, interesting. So the spread, meaning the new construction tends to have more amenities and is priced slightly higher. It's a more premium product than the existing stuff. I can make sense. That's funny. So I've bought 3 homes in my life, and I noticed the other day that in all 3 cases, the seller left used motor oil in the garage. Like that. That's an existing home. They were there for years and years and years, and then they left. And that was I was like, I wonder what it's like to buy a brand new home. The buyer, he'll take care of whatever this, I changed the oil in my car in 1972 and it's still sitting there in my garage.
Well, I'm exactly the same. I've bought 2 homes and they both have been existing. And for me, I can't handle the choices. Too many choices is too much for me. So I like seeing what a house looks like. I like knowing what the floor looks like with the wall color. And so that's why
as opposed to before it's even built.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's wild.
Yeah.
And for me, I have an immediacy thing, right? As opposed to putting this money down now, and who knows what's going to happen in 14 months or, however long it's going to take to complete.
Yes, exactly. And I think one of the interesting things, back to your question of new versus existing, I threw in a question about, would you be willing to buy a renovation, like a house that needed some work? And I was shocked. So I wouldn't, but that's because I'm not handy. But 80% of millennials apparently are either handy or believe that someone in their family or, with enough YouTube, they can do it. So 80% of millennials said, yeah, they'll take a house that needs a little bit of reno, but with a caveat. So I'm sure you're not surprised. One of it was, yes, as long as I can get a deal, good luck. Or yes, as long as the renovations are reasonable enough. I don't have to gut the whole house and start over, but if there's a little bit that I need to do, new windows, that kind of stuff, I'm willing to do it.
That's it. One of the impetus for the work that we do at Altos Research is when I bought my little old overpriced Silicon Valley house, we bought it in the expensive neighborhood but in the lowest price quartile. And it was 2001, right? Two bubbles ago. And the NASDAQ bubble was bursting. We knew it. And what happened was the high end of Los Altos, the town we were in at the time, that were like $2 million stock option homes, those evaporated. But the low end didn't go anywhere. And so by tracking, what we do is track everything in price range quartiles. So the high end of the market may be behaving differently from the low end. And then you can look at it and you can say, okay, I'm buying in the low end. The lot's the same size as the next range up. And so a remodel can move me up a notch, but it can't move me up to the top because those are the bigger lots. And so you can see that anywhere. And I think it sure seems to me like the narrative for millennials is that, real estate's been a really great investment. Came out of the bubble burst, and then their entire adult lives, it's been a really good deal to own. The rates are so low and revenue per home, like rental income, goes up. And so it seems like a pretty pervasive thought that like, this is a good deal and we can go improve a home and make some money on it.
But what's interesting too, so I agree with that. What's interesting is while it was, and I would say even before the pandemic, it was in particular a good deal because it took us so long to fully recover in terms of prices compared to last cycle. There were so many scars. So you had to be someone that was willing to say, I saw my parents lose their home, or I saw my parents lose their job, and I don't think that will happen to me, or I think I'm going to have enough security. And so you, of course, had people buying homes, before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic was kind of that powerful force that told people, you know what, maybe I should get back into the market and I can get over some of those scars. And now I legitimately need a home. I want a home and I'm willing to jump in. And so we definitely have seen more activity, as you know, more activity since the start of the pandemic.
Yeah, fascinating. Let's shift to the future. Two questions. Generally, what do you think about like the 2022? And, do you see, what are signals that you look for to know when this bull run ends? And do you have specifically in your data leading indicators? Like, are there numbers that turn in your data before the market as a whole turns? Are there signals like that you can point to with a correlation?
Sure. Okay. So starting with the forecast for next year, we're calling for growth. We're calling for growth in terms of prices, sales, and inventory. But
inventory growth.
I imagine. Sorry.
Inventory growth.
Inventory growth.
Okay.
Yes. But again, think I'm coming at this from a new home side. So I'm going to pull up. You know that I like my papers, so I want to pull this up so I can say everything accurately. What we have for single family housing starts is a 5% increase in starts next year over this year.
Okay.
And when we had talked earlier, Mike, we talked earlier about the lot data. We talked about the vacant developed lots. Another thing that we look at and kind of your idea of what can we see going forward, we have lots under development. And so a vacant developed lot, like I said, is a builder could buy it tomorrow and build a home on it. Lots under development is that when we know something's happening, they're trying to get that to a finished lot so that it can become a vacant developed lot. And so for us, looking at that data tells us that there's a lot of lots under development, 14% increase compared to last year. And we believe that builders are absorbing those, want those, will build on those. But we're trying to be realistic about the supply chain challenge, the labor challenge, the governmental delays, all of those different things, to not say, hey, we think it's 30% growth. We think it will grow, but maybe not as much as the industry would like it to grow. I wanted to layer in, we talked about our builder survey. So we asked the builders, so that was our forecast. And then we said to the builders, what are you expecting for housing starts? And the reason I like to do that is but builders know what they have lots under control. They know how many people they have on staff and all of that. So we have 53% of builders, which is actually lower than I would think. 53% that think starts will be higher in 2022 than 2021, but 24% that think it will be the same. Okay. So the majority are saying starts are the same or higher. Then for us to, how I said, you can't forecast starts without knowing lots. I think you can't forecast sales without knowing starts. So, it becomes this complex web, but our forecast is that sales will go higher. We have a higher number next year. We actually have 12.5% growth in new home sales. And that's on the belief that we talked earlier that some of those spec homes built this year will become available to consumers next year, plus the release of different new communities. And we believe community count goes higher. Last thing I'll say before I turn it back to you is that 47% of builders think that contract sales will be higher. 47% think higher next year. And then it's 28% think flat. So similar thing where it's flat to higher is the expectation for both starts and for sales next year.
Are these folks, are they skilled at forecasting? In other words, like I look at the parallels, the interest rate forecasters, and every time we look at interest rates, we all think, boy, they're really low. They must go higher. So we always everybody forecasts they're higher, but for 40 years they've been falling. are these folks are they are they better at forecasting their own like future?
So it's unfortunate when we have recency bias, because if you were to look at what the builder thought for 2020, they were wrong. And when you look at 2021, they were probably wrong. But if you thought back to a more normal year, 2017, 2018, I do think that they had a pretty good understanding of how many lots are coming online. They had an idea of their interest list. They had an idea of who their consumer was. And so they were able to have more accurate forecasts of, we believe that our division, because it's going to start on the division level. The division is going to know, how are we going to open new communities next year, all of that good stuff. So I do think in recent memory, probably not so much, but also, by the way, I don't think economists or analysts are particularly good at doing it when the world is changing either. So I don't want to hit them for that. But I do think builders also are trying to account for what they know to be supply chain challenges, because there's been really good communication recently from suppliers that are saying, hey, they've sent out letters, emails to their major clients and said, this is what's going to happen in 2022. And I want you to be able to plan accordingly. So I do think that they have better insight than most of us into what how realistic is it to get X many doors for next year.
Right. So, okay. So we're looking at everything in your data says like there's growth this year, there's growth in sales, there's growth in production, like all of the things are growing. Same things in our data. Right. Everything we look at says demand is high, supply is low, prices are climbing. There are risks that the train comes off the tracks. They're not in the data yet. What are the risks that you're looking for? Like when do we go? Like when do we pull out our cash before everybody else knows?
Yep. So a couple things from the data. One of the first early signs on a builder point of view will be cancellations. And that's going to come mostly from surveys or conversations. And cancellations usually do not all hit at once. You start to have some people on the margin go, ooh, like I feel a little bit uncomfortable about the market. And you'll start to have builders say, felt like our cancellations started to tick up. And so that's probably a little bit closer to the end. But we're always watching cancellations. To us, that is, I'm a friend with a CEO of a home builder, and he said that's his number one thing that he tracks every single week. Please don't tell me there's more cancellations. For us, and I will say this goes back to our people right in forecasting. For us, we looked at last cycle, and one of the earliest warning signs you could find was the buildup of quick move-in inventory, which is the spec inventory that we talked about. Do builders start to have homes that aren't selling? Because now that's telling you something's going on with demand. Even if we do have this underlying supply and demand imbalance, if QMI is building up, why are buyers not buying it for one reason or another? Another thing I would say is going back to my conversation, or I guess my point on millennials, is that we've seen the tiniest increase in builders saying they're running into qualification issues. That means, and it's not alarming. This is not me saying, hey, ring the alarm bells, but this is me saying, we're going to watch the qualification number, because we know that who has bought recently have been higher income, higher down payment, excellent credit score individuals. What if we don't have an endless pool of higher income, higher credit score, higher down payment individuals? And when the market has grown up so much and now we're going into our next tier of buyers, what if they don't have as good of a credit score? What if they are struggling to qualify? So I would say that's another thing that we're watching. And then you already hit on it as a joke, and I think we all laugh at ourselves about interest rate forecasts. But if we're wrong on interest rates, I know that there will be consumer shock to the monthly payment, because you talked about that. The monthly payment is favorable. You look at it, we have dirt cheap financing, but if that changes, people often will buy on that monthly payment, and that could impact it. That's what I'm looking at. Do you have anything that's like your key thing?
Yeah, so this is great. So the cancellations and the quick move-in inventory, do you have those as like a time series? Do you have
so quick move-in, yes. Cancellation, no.
Okay. So on our side, we're watching, so we watch the active stock, all the homes listed for sale. And the leading indicators in there are percentage of homes on the market that have taken a price cut recently. So the rule of thumb nationally is about a third 35%. And some markets where there's like more investors and bigger bill, like Phoenix, it can be higher, like 40%. In the hot California markets, it might be 25%. So, and these are homes that get listed and they need to take a cut. Sometimes that's strategic. Sometimes it's, whatever, bad expectations, whatever the reasons are, but a third of them. And then when a market's hot, a third of them think they overpriced, but only 25% need to cut because some of them got their offer. And then 20%. And then on the other side, when the market cools, now price reductions, we look around, it's, 40% of the market's taken a cut. 45%, half the stock has taken a price cut because the same reason, the cancellations, it correlating to the cancellations, like, wow, I'm not going to get this. Like, I got cold feet. I don't have the cash I thought I had. And what we saw was, so you get this real consistent pattern year to year in the price reductions and you cut your prices more in the fall. You want to move the house before the summer. And then what we saw in last year, price reductions never climbed in the fall because people kept buying right through the winter. And then they fell. And so we were nationally at like 15% with price reductions, where 35% is normal. Mm-hmm. Now, only 15% have to take the price cut because people were overbidding and doing all the things. That normalized this fall, it climbed back up. And so in the fall that we were looking at price reductions in the 27, 28% range. Normal's 35. Last year was 26. So we were like getting more normal. But all of a sudden, this winter, it's coming back down. And so it's one of the leading indicators for us. It says demand's actually picking up this winter before the holidays. And we're looking like first quarter's kind of got that demand baked in already. So price reductions is one that we look at. And it'll be really fascinating to see if we could correlate that in the, to those two time series with your quick moving inventory. The other place we'll do it is we'll watch the cohort of properties that are listed each week, the new listings. And it's a fabulous wisdom of the crowds example where the sellers and the listing agents, they know that the last house got a dozen offers and there's 40 people at the open house, so they price it a little more aggressively. They price their listing a little more aggressively. And so we can watch the inflection point in this newly listed cohort turn very quickly and go steeper when those sellers are adjusting. So all of a sudden, if there's nobody walking around the open home and you go to list your house, you put it at a little discount to make sure that it gets some attention. And so it shows up in that data very quickly. Those are some of the ones that we're looking at. And right now, they look really strong for really, it's like these are homes that are like just listed now. Maybe they get an offer in January, it closes in February, or, it's listing now and it gets an offer in February, it closes in March, and you hear about it in April. Like you can see it right now. And so we see so much of the beginning of the year already in that data. And it'd be really fun to see if we can correlate that with, for example, the QMI number that you have.
And what you were talking about too, you talked about how your data is showing that there's a little bit of an uptick in the market now from the resale point of view. We're seeing the same thing from builders, which is, and this kind of ties in a couple of thoughts. As you said, how good are builders at forecasting? Well, normally builders have seasonality that they want to forecast in. Like you said, any idea of seasonality blew up their forecast in 2020 because that's definitely not what happened. This year, seasonality did return. In particular, June and July, builders thought it was over. Like their sales really slowed down. It was a notable change. Now sales have come back. It is slower than like the heyday, but what they see is that the seasonal pattern is showing up, but everything is to a higher level. So you may be a little bit slower than normal, but you're higher than what the slower than normal would look like, if that makes sense. So just overall transactions are stronger.
That's really, that's exactly what we're seeing in the existing data. It's the peak of the frenzy was May, and then it backed off, and we could see it in a bunch of the numbers backing off a little bit later in the year. Hope we froze for a second. Oh, there we are. Okay.
Oh, yes. Okay. We're back. Yes.
Okay. So yeah. So peak, we saw it peak in May and then back off like June, July. Definitely looked like it was normalizing to us. And now it's accelerating again.
Yep, exactly.
Fascinating. Okay. So much stuff. What are you excited about right now? Or is there something that that you're looking forward to, or something else you want to make sure we hear about?
Sure. So it's probably something, Mike, you may have seen on Twitter today. We had a big release of new data this morning, not from the starts, but from Zonda's point of view. And it's something that we've really struggled with, because if you look at, so it's called the Zonda affordability ratio, the ZAR. And we created this because when we talk to builders and we talk about affordability, they will say our locals, a local person in Phoenix is struggling with affordability. Our out of towners, our people from LA, think it is dirt cheap here. And it's interesting because the post office change of address data isn't capturing as large of an effect as what we hear on the ground. And I think it's partly because inventory is so low that you don't need that many people to move to drive up home prices and to really influence the price of a market and to be a notable factor. And so what our ZAR does is we look at, so a normal measure for affordability is looking at the percent of households that can afford the median priced home. And the problem with that, in our belief, based on our conversations with builders, is that it's not capturing the LA income. It's not, because when someone moves, their income often stays with their employer. So if you moved to Nevada, you live in California, your income is likely going to be coded in California versus Nevada. And so that's making it hard to look at incomes, even though you've moved. So anyways, a long way to say, we've created this ZAR to account for what we think is more of the true demand in the market, where in some areas, affordability has actually gone up based on compared to where it was before, from the data. In some markets, affordability has come down because you do have some people that have moved, and not everyone's moving because they want to buy a huge mansion in a lower priced area. Some people are moving for other reasons, family reasons, whatever it may be. So we're not biased one way or another. It's not only to push up affordability, it's just trying to get a better sense of it. So I'd say that's something I'm very proud of. And we shared today, and I've had a lot of messages from builders that have just said, this actually feels intuitive to me because we do have so many people from out of metro or out of state.
Right. And in the last 18, 20 months, that was certainly accelerated. We called them the Zoom towns. My friend Connor Sen from Bloomberg called them the Zoom towns. Do you think that Zoom town phenomenon where, we're moving remote, we're moving from LA to Boise, is that one of the things that we've observed over the years is that every year available inventory of the existing stock declines. The available inventory declines, and it's generally, as rates have been low, it's been a really good deal to buy my next house and keep my first one for investment property. And so now I have two properties, and we've taken like 8 million homes out of the resale stock and turned it into rental stock over the last decade. And so each year we can see the next year's inventory lower. And do you think that the change of address info maybe didn't reflect the migration as much, because a lot of what was happening is just, I'm not actually moving. I'm buying a second house?
I think that's a very interesting question. And so if you were going to hold on to your existing home, you'd probably still do like a forward address though.
Yeah, depending on where you're feeling is the main home.
Yes. So I think there could be something, there's got to be something there, because we're hearing it directly from the builders. We're seeing it directly in their data. So this is somehow those two things are not coming together. And it could be what you're talking about is maybe it's the existence of multiple homes, of second homes. That could be, so that could be your point too, is that if you hold one home, you buy a second home, maybe you're not going to change your address to your second home, but you're still going to spend a lot of time there. So yeah, I think there are a lot of factors that could play into it, but I think that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. And we noticed, for example, that Boise, one of the boom Zoom towns, had, when we looked at, for example, our price reductions number, Boise's normally in the 40% range. Boise was down at like 7% in April or May. Right? Nobody, because you're coming in, as you point out, you're coming in from LA, you're like, I'll pay whatever, doesn't matter, whatever you want, right? But that slowed down this fall significantly, and price reductions in Boise got back up to their normal 40% range again. Significant. So what that says to me is significantly fewer Zoomtown migrations, or possibly, there was a price limit where all of a sudden it didn't feel right anymore, and buyers got sensitive. And the locals were like, well, let's see what these, idiots from LA are going to pay. And all of a sudden they say, oh, there's a limit. Maybe there's something like that happening.
That's so important. I think under discussed is when you think about, even if you just use, and I know we're making this California focus, and that's not the point, but if you are thinking about Orange County to Riverside, so a lot of people moved from just more coastal California to inland California, but prices in inland California have gone up so much that, to your point, is there still that value play? Do people, before you were moving because you were saving $200,000 and you got more home, what if it's only $50,000 now? Do you want the commute? Do you want to change your lifestyle? So I do think there is a threshold, even if you have not unlimited funds, but pretty sizable funds, you're still going to weigh some equation. You're still going to be smart about your decision of where you want to put your money.
Yeah, the arbitrage goes away, right? Like it evaporates. Exactly. Yeah, so that's really fascinating. So I will looking forward to seeing more on the ZAR, the affordability ratio. Does that tell us right now off the top of your head? Are there markets that look particularly affordable, surprisingly affordable by your ratio?
Here's the problem. So I love the ZAR because I was part of creating it, so I'm always going to have to love it. The problem is I'm born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. And in Cleveland, there are more affordable homes than most elsewhere in the country. But I have a friend that owns a house, and she bought a house for $90,000 recently in Cleveland. But she was willing to do like a down and dirty house. Like she wanted something that she didn't pay much. She wanted a low mortgage payment. I know if you want to live in a very good part of Cleveland with a good school district, close to the highway, a nice sized home, maybe a new home or a nice existing home, that's not fully captured in the ZAR. And that's not just my index, that's anyone's index. Yeah. So what I would say is Cleveland is our most affordable market. And I do think you can get bang for your buck. And that's the same with a lot of areas in the Midwest. But in the Midwest, in Atlanta, in a lot of markets, you have such a big gap between your A and your F locations that your market average gets a little bit funky. And so I caution that on any index. But the Midwest is still the most affordable across.
Yeah. Okay. For sure. We did some work with affordability as in retrospect with after the big bubble burst, where you could. What we noticed is there was a relationship, of the basic affordability be median income versus median price, and generally median price, median income goes up. The markets that were most risky, the ones that adjusted down most, were those that we could plot available inventory per capita or people per house, basically. And what we would find is that there's a pretty linear relationship for like if you have more people competing per available house, price is up. It doesn't matter what the income is. And so when you could look at like Vegas started to get out of whack when the inventory per capita started climbing, and then the prices now is getting expensive, but the inventory per capita was super high. And so in retrospect, you go, that's the one where affordability matters. You're in Palo Alto, it's a city of whatever, 70,000 people, and there's 14 homes for sale, it doesn't have to be affordable to the median income. It's going to have 14 people. Like, that's it. And so it can be forever unaffordable in a place like Palo Alto. But when, and so one of the things I notice now, though, is because inventory is so low, inventory everywhere in the country, Vegas looks, now with inventory like the Bay Area did 10 years ago. Like it's so inventory on that old scale is like everything inventory per capita is lower. So it was like, the question is, when is affordability a signal of the market maybe going to fall? And so by looking at inventory per capita, that was how we were able to discern it.
So you brought up a couple really big points there. So when we look at the payment to income, and you used Northern California as your example, we also, and this is not just our index, it's a lot of different affordability numbers. We know that there are a lot of people that have shares or that have supplemental income that's not getting captured in their income. And so in those areas, you had talked about earlier up in Northern California, I think you were talking about in the past, like last cycle, but you talked about how a lot of it was people that were able to cash out something from their stocks and they were able to purchase homes. That's going to make those markets look worse in affordability index because income doesn't capture wealth. And so we have to acknowledge those limitations. I think those limitations are there. And I think the second point, which you made, is that when does affordability show an inflection point? So I started by telling you in our index, the Midwest is the most affordable. But what I didn't tell you is that when we talk to builders and we look at our survey data, buyers in the Midwest are the most cautious. They are the most afraid of buying at the top. They feel like they have the most hesitancy, and that's because the Midwest is now expensive relative to the Midwest. Midwest is cheap to us. Midwest is not cheap like it was in the past to the Midwest. So I think that becomes this whole different layer because, yes, it looks like that, but perception is, geez, prices have gone up 15%. Prices don't go up 15% in Cleveland.
Yeah, wow. That's fascinating. And therefore, even though they are more affordable relatively nationally, there's actually some risk there because people are sensitive to price changes. Wow,
exactly.
That's really neat.
It's different by market. So you talk about the inflection point. I just think it's going to be, because in those cases, there's a way higher affordability ratio than where you're located. But I don't think your market's at an inflection point. We're not seeing it in the data, at least from the builders, but maybe in some of the areas. I don't think the Midwest is at an inflection point now, but I do know that there's more heightened consumer jitteriness than you would see in other areas right now.
Fascinating. That's really, really neat. Okay, let's bring it to a close. So 2022, there's some risks out there, but as of right now, we're train is on the tracks for the year.
I love that you said as of right now. Based on what we know today, yes. If interest rates rise only modestly, yes.
Yeah, great. Okay. Where can people go to connect with you or follow you on the social and find out more about Zonda?
Sure. So go to www.zonda.com. No,
Zonda.
that's wrong. Zonda Home. ZondaHome.com.
Zonda Home.
I am on Twitter at Ali Wolf Econ. And I'm very active on LinkedIn as well. So you can just look for Ali Wolf with Zonda and you'll find me there.
Terrific. Ali, such a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining us on the Top of Mind podcast. I really appreciate your work, and I'm glad we've got a chance to connect conversationally and maybe face to face sometime soon. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us on the Top of Mind podcast, and stop by Altos Research or ZondaHome.com to get more data, more information on both what both Ali and we are up to. And we will see you next time right here.
Thanks for listening to Top of Mind. See you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.